Hello and welcome to Commsverse. This is session 212, 10 things to think about when developing an application for Microsoft Teams. And today will be presented to you by Yannick Reekmans. So Yannick, you are ready to go.
Thank you, Michael. So welcome all to my session, 10 things to think about when developing an application for Microsoft Teams. I am Yannick Reekmans, and I work as a cloud solution architect in Belgium with a broad interest in the Microsoft clouds. As a side hustle, I'm also an office development MVP, focusing mainly on SharePoint and Teams. If you want to get in touch with me, my Twitter handle and my blog URL are on the slides. Just feel free to reach out. First of all, a big thank you to our sponsors. Without them, this event wouldn't even be possible. And a special mention for Poly, which provided me with my Teams certified headset to present this session. Let's take a look at the agenda. We'll start with a small introduction, and then we'll take a look at the 10 questions you need answering before you even start developing an application in Microsoft Teams, and we'll do a small wrap up. Now, it's always good to set expectations. So what you'll get today from me is things to think about and their pros and cons and potential when it's relevant, and their potential answers, and the tooling to help out if you want to do some development. There won't be much code in the session, so if this is not what you expected, there are some rockstar presenters in the same slot presenting their own session. If you hurry, you can still make it, but if you stay here, I'll try to make it worth your while. So let's dive in. You want to build an application. There are 4 ways to approach this. The first one is you're looking at ready-made solutions. Ready-made solutions are those that are available in the Microsoft Teams store. In this session, I'm assuming that there's nothing available out of the box or from third-party providers that can solve your problem. So the second thing you can look at is the Power Platform. You can start automating tasks and create some low-code applications with Power Automate and Flow. Once again, for this session, I'm assuming that you looked at this already and that you dismissed it as not being a good fit for the thing that you want to achieve with your application. And then you've got the reference solutions, also known as app templates. App templates are available on GitHub, and they're open source, so you can use them as is, or take them and adjust them, modify them to fit your needs. Now, you can guess it. For this session, I'm assuming that these don't fit your needs either. So we're going with a custom-built application. Blank canvas, we want to build something from scratch, and we want to get started. So there are some decisions you need to make. And we're going to go directly to the first question. So you have to ask yourself what problem you're trying to solve. You have to know who you want to help. Which people do you want to help? Do you know them? Do you know them personally? What are they doing as a day job? What problem are they having? Why do they need this custom application? When do they need it? Is it like always in a one-on-one chat, when they're at a specific customer or a specific place physically? So is it in the morning or in the evening? At what time do they need this custom application? So you need to make sure that you know why you're doing this. What's the goal of your application? And you have to describe it. It helps a lot to keep focus when you're doing the development, to describe the goal of your application. And describing this goal, it needs to be simple and concise, goal-oriented and specific, and also realistic. So you're not going to build a big application in 2 days. So if you only got 10 days to build something, be realistic in what you can achieve and still achieve your goal that you set up to try and help out the people that need this custom application. In this first step, focus on the story first. Don't think about solutions yet. Just see if you can make the story work and do whatever you want to do so that you know what your end goal is for this application. Only when you know this goal and have described this goal, you can start thinking about what the solutions would be to this problem. And then you get to think about, now you know your goal, you get to think about, is it worthwhile to invest custom development in this? So you take a look at, is it a real or a made up problem? Is there something in your company or someone in your company that really has this problem that you're trying to solve with your application? Or did you just have a cool idea and you made up a problem so your application could potentially solve it? Because if it's a real problem, people will use it. If it's a problem you created just to build your application will sit idle and no one will be using it. Try to estimate the usage time. How long will people be using it? And also, how many people or how many number of users will your application have? Taking into account these three metrics, you can decide if the return on investment is worthwhile. You take the time you need to invest to build this application, and you check if you're actually winning some time or some money by building this application. So in step 3, you decided that building the application definitely needs to happen. So now you need to choose a Teams app capability for your scenario. So looking at the Teams app capabilities, we'll start with a tab. A tab is a canvas to host your UI. So it's basically a big blank space that you can fill with data, context information. It's a website that's hosted right inside Teams. You've also got bots, which is a one-on-one or group chat, automated chat with a bot, which talks to your backend system to process your information. You can also do message extensions. Message extensions allow your application to share rich cards inside a conversation. Don't just copy and paste a link inside a message, but make sure that your application makes it a rich card that shows contextual information, potentially some action buttons, and things like that. You've also got message actions that can interpret chat. So it allows you to your users to send the data of a specific message to your backend application, your web service, for processing. Your web service can read the content of the message and act accordingly. Respond with another text, with an action card, or even a model dialog to request more information. Task modules are those model dialogues. It's a pop-up dialog for requesting more information from your end users. So you send a message to your application, your backend service, but you need more information depending on the question that the user asked. So you can pop up a task module to create some complex input flows with multiple steps to help out with all of requesting that information. And the last one are notifications. It's a way to get attention. You can mention people or put some activity in the activity feed within your application to make sure that whatever happens in your system gets noticed by the correct people that are using Microsoft Teams. Now, these capabilities are put into two buckets. So you've got on the left the tabs, which are canvas-based. This means that it's a complete blank space you can fill just like a website with a lot of information. And then on the right-hand side, you've got the message-based capabilities. Those are triggered by a message, either by interpreting the available chats or the text that gets sent to it, the ability to read out while you're typing your message and interacting with it to provide more contextual information with the message extensions, or bots that do a question response type of interaction inside a chat with either you yourself or with multiple people. So it's up to you to choose which of these capabilities will fit the best for your application. And then you have to choose the Teams app scope for your scenario. So for a Teams application, you've got two scopes. It's either a Teams scoped application or a personal scoped application. In the Teams scoped application, a Teams scoped application is supposed to surface relevant information for a group of people. So it's shown in Teams and channels and in group chats, for example. and it's supposed to show information that is relevant to all of the people that are available within that context. And then the personal scope and the personal scoped application, it's supposed to surface information that's relevant to the specific user that has installed your app in the personal scope. A good example here is Microsoft Planner. The Microsoft Planner app, when you put it in a Teams and in a channel, it will show all the tasks that are relevant to that team and to the people in the team. But when you put it in the personal scope and it gets added to the app rail on the left-hand side of your Teams application, it only shows the tasks that are assigned to you as a user. So it's very important for you as a developer to choose where you want to be with your application, in which scope you want to be, and what you want to do. So if we're looking at the capabilities and we're mapping them to the scopes, you see that tabs, message actions, message extensions, and bots can be in the team scope, but they also can be in the personal scope. In the personal scope, there's one additional option. It's basically a Teams tab that it's pinned to the left rail, and it's called a personal app. So this is what Microsoft Planner does, for example. Now you're starting development. You have to choose a development framework for your application. Depending on the functionality, you've got some choices. So if you want to build a bot, you probably want to use the bot framework v4. Bot framework v4 makes it very easy for you to interact with the Teams application itself. It makes sure that your bot is Teams aware, knows about the context information, knows who is logged in and who is using the bot, who's interacting with it, who the other people in the conversation are, in which team the bot is installed, and things like that. So if you use the bot framework v4, you can choose between C#, JavaScript, or Python for your development language or your coding language. With messaging extensions, these are also built as a technology built on top of the bot framework v4. The only notable exception is that you can only use C# and JavaScript SDKs to build messaging extensions. There's no Python SDK for messaging extensions here. And then for a Teams tab, seeing that it's basically just a website that's embedded as an iframe inside the Microsoft Teams application, you can pick any web framework that you know and love to build that application. Now we see that mostly in these scenarios within Microsoft Teams and the Microsoft ecosystem, that Node.js and React are very popular, and then the C#-based ASP.NET Core or ASP.NET MVC. For those developers that come from the SharePoint side and are having experience with SPFX or the SharePoint framework, they can also use the SharePoint framework to build a Teams tab in the personal or the team scoped with the SharePoint framework. I got a question yesterday if you can use Blazor. So Blazor can be used as well because it's just a web framework as well. Another MVP, Thomas Gull, has a very good blog post and GitHub repository referencing the ability to create a Teams tab using Blazor. It's not that straightforward, but he has a great walkthrough that I will put in the reference slides. So now you know how to build your backend code. But your backend code is just one part of your application. Of course, you have to surface your application and have a good UX or UI right inside Microsoft Teams. So another decision to make is how do you want your application to look and feel when you show it in Microsoft Teams. One of the first things you can do is work with adaptive cards. Adaptive cards are a declarative UI. So it's a JSON object that describes what has to be rendered on the screen. It doesn't render it itself. It has no styling associated with the JSON object. It's just saying, I want 3 buttons, I want one text, I want one header, I want one thing in bold and one label, things like that. And then the hosting application, be it Skype, Android, iOS, the Windows notification system, or Microsoft Teams, and a lot of other hosting applications, will just take that JSON object and render it in the UI. They will take care of the styling. That way, your adaptive card will look and feel like it belongs inside the hosting application. So the same declarative UI, the same JSON object can be reused in Skype and in Teams and will look native to either Skype or Teams. Now, that's for adaptive cards, for tabs, messaging extensions, and bots. But what about the UX framework for Teams tabs? Well, lucky you, a tab is just a website, so you can use whatever framework you want. Yeah, of course, that's a good response, but that's not what companies want or what developers want. They want their app to look like the first-party applications. They need to look like they belong inside Microsoft Teams. Well, lucky you again, Microsoft has a very consistent UX framework story, which I'm sorry might be a little bit of sarcasm here. Because if you look at the framework story, everything is named Fluent UI at the moment. But Fluent UI, the one Fluent UI isn't the same as the other Fluent UI. So let's dive deep in how this is going. Check. Okay. So Fluent UI is a collection of UX frameworks for creating beautiful cross-platform apps that share code, design, and interaction behavior. This is the marketing speak that I took one-on-one from their website. So it's a collection of UX frameworks for creating beautiful cross-platform applications. This is the thing that you think, yes, this is what I want. It's cross-platform, I can use it whenever, wherever. I want to build an application with this. And they look great, admittedly, so the controls are there and everything is great. Problem is, you see, Fluent UI is available for web, Windows, iOS, Android, macOS, and cross-platform with React Native. Problem with these is that those are all separate packages, and the support for the controls is different in each of those packages. So a control might exist for the web, but not for Windows, might exist for Windows, but not for macOS. So it's always a little bit of searching if everything is available that you need. Now for Microsoft Teams, we're focusing on web, of course. So we're just focusing on web. And if you look at the NPM packages, it's also known as @fluentui/React in the v7.x.x. And it used to be known, or previously known, as Office UI Fabric React v7.x.x. So this Office UI Fabric React basically got just a rename to Fluent UI React. There is a little bit of Fluent UI styling that's default in v7. It was introduced optional in v6, but it's just the same Office UI Fabric React that we have known and loved for the last 6 versions. It's a great set of controls and it has the best support available, but they really don't look like Microsoft Teams. For some reason, Teams has a very different UX story than Fluent UI, and the Fluent UI components are styled like they belong in SharePoint and OneDrive, in Office, but just not for Microsoft Teams. So the Teams team tried to resolve it. They provided the Microsoft Teams UI control library, also known as MS Teams UI Components React. This thing has some specific controls for Teams. Not all of them. They don't have the same controls as Fluent UI has, and they don't have the best support available. This control library still shows up when you look at the App Studio app right inside Microsoft Teams. Problem is that it's actually deprecated. The Teams team is not using it anymore, and they are not maintaining this library. Now, the other option is once again Fluent UI. Now, you're going to say, what? We already talked about Fluent UI. Well, this is a different Fluent UI. So it used to be known as @FluentUI. Well, it's now known as @FluentUI React North Star with a version of v0.xx. It was previously known as FluentUI React. Remember, we also already had FluentUI React in v7. It was previously known as FluentUI React v0. And before that, it was known as Stardust UI React in the v7. So Microsoft took every control or UX library, UX framework that they had, and put it underneath the Fluent UI branch. For me, that's confusing. So that's why this is a very big slide that builds up for everything. So that's Fluent UI, also known as React North Star, which has a goal of being a themable control library. So their goal was to take all the controls that are available in Fluent UI or in Office UI Fabric React, take them and take a different themable approach so that this library can be used in multiple places, and just as a theme can be applied, be it CSS or something other that's being put in your application, so that the same controls can be rendered in a light mode and a dark mode for Teams, but also can be used in SharePoint and take the SharePoint branding, for example. So it's a themable control library. It was started by the Microsoft Teams team, and it's still the official library for Teams to build your custom applications. Problem is that the status is a bit unclear. So while it's still the official library and development is ongoing here, it's only built by the Teams team. So luckily, there's Fluent UI V8 that's coming on. And V8 has a roadmap that's being actively defined. So we're hoping that some things from the North Star or the previous Teams library, the themable components will be put into Fluent UI. Now, V8 is not a conversion or a converging with North Star. It's not in this version, but it is a long-term goal of the Fluent UI team to merge North Star with Fluent UI, to bring all the positive things that the Teams team was trying to build into North Star or Stardust, and bring it also into Fluent UI. But it's not happening in V8. And V8 probably also won't have a theme for Teams in this version. So it might come with some future version of Fluent UI so that you can use Fluent UI and build your application. And when you host it in Teams, it will look like Teams. And when you host it in SharePoint, it looks like SharePoint. So at the moment, Stardust or North Star are the way to go if you want to build an application that looks like Microsoft Teams. Only problem, if you host it somewhere else, it will still look like Microsoft Teams. So you got your backend and your front end decided. Now you have to handle authentication. And authentication for your application is different and also depends on the functionality that you want to do. So you have to look and see at which points your application needs authentication from your end users or from those that are using the bot, the messaging extension, or the tab. So for a bot is in the backend a web service that's available. So a bot can authenticate directly with the web service so that only your bot can talk to your web service. But maybe you want your end users to authenticate as well. There is a good Microsoft Docs document that describes all the authentication scenarios for all of the workloads, and they're different for each of the workloads. So for bots, you might want to have your end user authenticate so that your web service or your bot backend can use that authentication to request user-specific information. The same goes for messaging extensions. So you send data to your web service for processing. So when your user is authenticated with the web service or with the backend of your messaging extension, it can be used to get some contextual information relevant to the user, a specific task that's been assigned, or putting the message that's sent to your backend into the Microsoft To-Do or Planner associated with the user, so that all of those things require authentication. And with tabs, it's even more complex. So a tab is just a website. The website itself can be unauthenticated, but it uses some backend services. So your backend service might need authentication with SharePoint, Teams, OneDrive to do their work. So it might be an app-only scenario just for the backend. Potentially, you want to pass through authentication as well. So you want to have your end user log in into the Teams tab and take that context to surface relevant information to the user. For tabs, you've got two possibilities. You can use the Azure AD single sign-on, which is GA recently, so that the credentials of the user that is logged in into Teams is passed on to the tab as well and can be used there for on behalf of authentication flows. You can also, when your tab needs different authentication, you have to implement it yourself. So if a user has to authenticate with different credentials than the ones they're logged into in Teams with, it's a more complex scenario. You have to use MCell or the Microsoft authentication library potentially to get that authentication worked out. And then, since a tab can exist for multiple pages, since it's just an iframe in a website, you have to decide whether there are pages that can be viewed unauthenticated and some that can be viewed authenticated. And then determine device support. Determining device support is something that mostly happens too late in the development lifecycle. So what devices are your users using? In what resolution do your users will your users be using your application? Does it need to be responsive? Does it have to work on 7 types of mobile devices on Windows, Linux, Mac, and things like that? So best to determine upfront which devices need to be supported. So you can create your test scenarios related to those. So you make sure that you test everything and test your application so that it works for your end users and where your end users or the devices your end users are using. Step 9, it's finally time to start developing. And before you can start developing, you have to define or decide upon your tool set that you want to use while developing. A Teams application is a little bit of code or a lot of code in your backend, but in the end, you can create everything yourself. You can write it without tooling, without help, and you can create the manifest file, the JSON file describing all your functionalities just in Notepad without any validation, and then you put it through the App Studio validation process. Or you can use one of the tooling frameworks that are specifically made for developing applications for Microsoft Teams. Well, the first of them is the Yeoman generator for Teams combined with the Teams App Studio, which is an application that is available in Microsoft Teams. So the Yeoman generator for Teams is a community-driven project started by Victor Whelan and supported by a lot of other people in the community. And it allows you to create tabs, bots, outgoing webhooks, connectors, messaging extensions, localization, and validation. The validation part here of your Teams application is done in App Studio. So it's not done right inside the Yeoman generator, but it's done in App Studio. So combining these two, and with the long-term support of the community, this Yeoman generator exists for 1.5 to 2 years already, I believe. This is the most mature way to get your development process started. It's a Yeoman generator, so basically you open up a terminal, you type Yo Teams, and Yeoman generator will ask you a bunch of questions on what you want to build and what functionality you want to create, and then it will generate all of the files necessary to start your development journey. Yeoman generator supports Node.js and TypeScript, and it includes the Fluent UI, React North Star, or the Stardust UI components for Teams applications. You've also got the new kid on the block, being Microsoft Teams Toolkit. This is in preview at the moment, and it's been launched at Build last month, and it only allows you, well, it's built and released by Microsoft, so it's a first-party extension to Visual Studio Code. It does more or less the same thing as the Yeoman generator, basically asking you questions and then generating or scaffolding the project for you or a starter project for you. The only and it integrates validation. So the validation step that you need App Studio for with the Yeoman generator is integrated directly in Microsoft Teams Toolkit. Now, personally, the downsides I see in this Microsoft Teams Toolkit for now is the fact that it can only provision tabs and messaging extensions. So no bots, outgoing webhooks, or connectors. It doesn't support localization either. It might not be a big problem as a developer if you just need to develop tabs or messaging extension. You can still go with Microsoft Teams Toolkit, but the big downside for me as a developer is the fact that it's also built on Node.js, but it only generates files in JavaScript. So no TypeScript support here. It's a bit weird thinking that Microsoft pushes TypeScript almost everywhere, and then for the Microsoft Teams Toolkit, the application gets scaffolded with JavaScript files. It does include Stardust components or React Nordstar components, UX components as well. So for that, it's similar to the Omen generator. And then in the future, there supposedly is coming a Microsoft Teams Toolkit extension for Visual Studio. It's not available yet. We know not much about it, but probably it will be built the same way or reusing a lot of components from the toolkit from Visual Studio Code. So I expect that the feature set will be similar there. And then lastly, once you've done developing and your application is ready, you have to pick a distribution method for your application. How are you going to give your application to the end users? How are you going to distribute it and make sure that your users know where to find your application and how to use it? First of all, sideloading your application. Sideloading your application is a valid approach for testing purposes and during development. Sideloading means that you install your application directly in Microsoft Teams. So you can install it in the personal scope just for you. It's not available in the store. No one of your other users can activate it, can see it. It's not available for them. So it's just for you to use. Or for a specific team. So you can go into a specific team, into the settings, apps, and then upload a custom application. So that means that this custom application is only available right inside that specific team in Microsoft Teams. As a result, this will also mean that when you want to share this application with other users, you have to send over the app itself, which is a zip file, to that user and say you have to install it manually. It's not a real distribution method because everything needs to happen manually. If you want to install it in multiple teams, you have to go in each team and upload it separately. So a better way would be to put it in the tenant app catalog. The tenant app catalog allows you to distribute your applications inside your organization. So it's your store. It's your section in the Microsoft Teams store, specific for your application, for your organization, excuse me. So when you take your application and you make it available inside your organization store, this also allows you to use app permission policies. App permission policies are a way to assign an application to specific users. You can say this is an application that is available to all the people in the HR department and no one else. No one else can see the application, no one else can install the application. Distribution through the organization app catalog also allows you to use app setup policies. App setup policies are a way to install an application for your users. So it doesn't require your users anymore to go into your organizational app catalog and select the application and install it. No, it will just be installed directly inside their Teams client with these setup policies. Then you've got app source, and app source is basically the distribution to the whole wild world. App source is the global store for all kinds of applications, for SharePoint, for Teams, for Dynamics. So you can put your Teams application into app source, and then it will be surfaced inside the Microsoft Teams store, and people can install it there. So it's not just for your organization or for your chosen organizations. It's available for all the organizations in the world that might find value in your application. Before you can go into AppSource, Microsoft will do a vetting of your application. So they will take your application, do a security check, do a functionality check, make sure that you're following the guidelines and the standards that are available. They will probably ask you to do a developer attestation. So you have to fill in a checklist on what you what you will be doing with the data that you receive from all of those tenants that have your application installed, and things like that. So it's a very thorough vetting process before you can get your application inside the app source or global store. Brings us to the end of my session. I've got a list of resources available that guide you for each step to help you make the decisions, to see where I got the information to create the session. So feel free to go check out if you have other questions. And with that, I want to thank you for joining. If you have questions, feel free to reach out. So my Twitter handle is there again, and my blog URL as well. You can find from my blog, my LinkedIn, or any other ways to contact me. Reach out if you've got questions. I'm more than happy and willing to help you out. We will host a Q&A in the breakout room after this session. I have to stay here for 3 more minutes, and then I will switch over to the breakout room for a one-on-one chat or a group chat, and you can have a direct conversation with me. And I want to urge you to please provide feedback for the session as well as for the event. It helps us to make our event and our sessions better, so it's very important if you will take the time to fill out this post-event survey. Thank you very much. Let me check with Michael if there are any questions in the Q&A. I don't see any.
Nope, it looks like you did such a good job. Nobody had any questions, or they didn't want to type it and they want to talk to you in the breakout session.
Well, we'll see you when I switch over to the breakout session. Thank you, Michael, for being my producer. I guess we'll just stay here for a little bit longer, and then I'll switch over to the breakout room.
Yeah, we'll stay here for another minute or so. So you guys have a chance to type in a question if you'd like. And if not, we'll close this in about a minute, and then Yannick will go to the breakout and you can have a full conversation with him.
Thank you very much, and have a good conference or the rest of the conference.